My name is Margaret Thompson. I am 72 years old, and what I am about to tell you will shake you to your core. For 47 years, I was married to Robert Thompson, a man who built an empire worth $850 million from nothing. We raised 3 children together, sacrificed everything for our family, and I thought I knew what loyalty meant. I was wrong. On March 15, 2024, the day we laid my beloved husband to rest, my eldest son, Michael, made a choice that would change everything. While I stood alone at the cemetery, watching the casket of the love of my life disappear into the earth, my son was 30 miles away, dancing at his wife's birthday party. But that betrayal was just the beginning. If you are listening to this story, leave your like and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. I want to know how far this story has reached. The funeral was scheduled for 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Robert had been fighting pancreatic cancer for 8 months. I never left his side. I held his hand through every chemotherapy session, every sleepless night, every moment of agony. Michael knew his father was dying. We all knew. 3 days before Robert passed, Michael came to the hospital. I remember the smell of disinfectant, the beeping of machines, the way the fluorescent lights made everything look pale and cold. My son stood at the foot of the bed, looking at his unconscious father, and said something that should have warned me. "Mom, you know Dad always wanted us to be happy, right? He wouldn't want us to put our lives on hold." I thought he was talking about grieving. I thought he meant we shouldn't let sorrow consume us. I had no idea he was already planning his absence from his own father's funeral. The morning of March 15th, I woke up at 5 a.m. I had barely slept in months, but that day I couldn't close my eyes at all. I put on the black dress Robert had bought me for our last anniversary. He said I looked beautiful in black, that it made my silver hair shine like starlight. At 8 a.m., my phone rang. It was Michael. "Mom, I need to tell you something important." I was standing in our kitchen, the same kitchen where Robert used to make me coffee every morning for 47 years. The silence without him was deafening. "What is it, son?" "Sarah's birthday party is today. We planned it months ago, before Dad got worse. All her family is coming from overseas. We can't cancel it now." I felt something cold spread through my chest. "Michael, today is your father's funeral." "I know, Mom, but Dad would understand. He always said family happiness comes first. Family happiness." He was talking about his wife's family while his own father lay in a coffin. "The funeral is at 2 p.m., Michael. Sarah's party can wait." There was a pause. I could hear Sarah's voice in the background, saying something about the catering and the flowers. On the day of her father-in-law's funeral, she was worried about party decorations. "Mom, we've already made our choice. Sarah needs me today. Her whole family is here." "And what about your family?" I wanted to scream. "What about me, who gave birth to you, raised you, sacrificed my career to support your father's business so you could inherit everything we built?" But I didn't scream. I simply said, "Your father's funeral is at 2 p.m. at St. Mary's Cemetery. I'll be there, alone." He hung up. I stood in that empty kitchen, holding the phone, and I realized that the man I had raised, the boy I had sung lullabies to, the young man I had put through Harvard Business School with my own teaching salary, had just chosen a birthday party over his father's final goodbye. But the real shock was yet to come, because what Michael didn't know was that Robert had changed his will just 2 days before he died. And what I discovered that afternoon would make his betrayal cost him everything he thought he was entitled to. The funeral began at 2 p.m. sharp. I sat in the front pew of St. Mary's Church, surrounded by 400 people who had come to honor Robert Thompson. Business partners, employees, old friends, distant relatives. Everyone was there. Everyone except my son. But as I watched them lower my husband's casket into the ground, as I felt the March wind cutting through my black coat, I remembered something Robert had whispered to me in his final hours. "Maggie," he said, his voice barely audible, "I've taken care of everything. The documents are in the safe. You'll know what to do when the time comes." That night, alone in our house for the first time in 47 years, I opened the safe. Inside was a folder labeled "For Margaret, Final Arrangements." As I read the first document, I felt my hands begin to tremble. My husband, the brilliant businessman who had built an empire, had anticipated everything, even his son's betrayal. And tomorrow, Michael would learn that choosing a party over his father's funeral had cost him exactly $850 million. The morning after the funeral, I sat at Robert's desk in our study, surrounded by 47 years of memories. The leather chair still smelled like his cologne. The coffee cup he used every morning sat exactly where he left it, a ring stain marking his place on the mahogany surface. Sarah had posted 17 photos on social media from her birthday party. I know because my neighbor Betty called me at 7 a.m. to tell me. In every single photo, Michael was smiling, laughing, dancing. While his father's grave was still fresh with turned earth, my son was celebrating. The folder Robert left me contained 3 documents that would change everything. The first was a new will, dated just 48 hours before his death. The second was a letter addressed to me. The third was something that made my blood run cold, a private investigator's report about Michael and Sarah's finances. My husband had been watching them. The letter began simply, "My dearest Maggie, if you are reading this, it means I am gone and you have discovered the truth about our son." Robert had known about the party. He had known that Michael planned to skip the funeral. How? Because Sarah had been bragging about it to her friends for weeks, and one of those friends worked at Robert's company. But the betrayal ran deeper than missing a funeral. According to the investigator's report, Michael and Sarah had been planning for Robert's death for months. They had already contacted real estate agents about selling our family home. They had opened new bank accounts. Sarah had even put deposits down on a mansion in Beverly Hills, assuming she would soon have access to hundreds of millions of dollars. They were spending money they didn't have yet, money they assumed would be theirs the moment Robert died. The new will told a different story. Instead of leaving Michael his expected half of the estate, Robert had changed everything. The will stated that any heir who failed to attend his funeral would forfeit their entire inheritance. Every single penny of the $850 million fortune would go to charity and to me. But there was more. Robert had also included a clause that would test Michael's character one final time. Before the will could be read officially, Michael would be given one opportunity to explain his absence and apologize. If he chose to lie or showed no remorse, the disinheritance would be permanent. My husband, even in death, was teaching our son about consequences. At 10 a.m., Michael finally called. "Mom, how was everything yesterday? I'm sorry we couldn't make it." Couldn't make it. As if the funeral was a casual lunch appointment. "It was your father's funeral, Michael." I know. But Sarah was really upset about her party. You understand, right? Dad would have understood. No apology, no remorse. Just excuses and assumptions about what his dead father would have wanted. "The lawyer wants to meet with us tomorrow to read the will," I said carefully. "Great. Finally, we can get all this legal stuff sorted out. Sarah and I have been looking at some properties. We found this amazing place in Beverly Hills, 8 bedrooms, a pool. Dad would have loved it. Dad would have loved it. The man who refused to leave his family home even when he became worth hundreds of millions, who drove the same car for 15 years, who donated anonymously to charities every Christmas. That man would have loved an 8-bedroom mansion bought with inheritance money." "Michael," I said slowly, "what if your father left everything to charity?" He laughed, actually laughed. "Mom, don't be ridiculous. I'm his only son. Sarah and I are his legacy. Besides, Dad always said the business would be mine someday." The business. Robert had built Thompson Industries from nothing, working 18-hour days for 30 years. Michael had worked there for 5 years, in a management position his father created specifically for him, and had never once stayed past 5 p.m. "We'll see tomorrow," I said. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the little boy who used to crawl into bed with us during thunderstorms, who cried when his goldfish died, who promised at age 12 that he would always take care of me when I got old. Where had that boy gone? At midnight, I made a decision that would change everything. I called Robert's lawyer, James Morrison, and told him about the party, about Michael's attitude, about the complete lack of remorse. "Mrs. Thompson," James said quietly, "your husband anticipated this exact scenario. He knew his son better than his son knew himself." The next morning, Michael and Sarah arrived at the lawyer's office 30 minutes late, laughing about something on Sarah's phone. She was wearing a designer dress that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Michael was checking his watch, clearly wanting to be somewhere else, Even at the reading of his father's will, my son had somewhere better to be. James Morrison opened the folder with steady hands. Before we begin, I need to ask Michael a direct question. Can you explain your absence from your father's funeral? Michael shifted in his chair. We had a prior commitment, a family celebration. Dad would have understood that family happiness comes first. No mention of remorse, no acknowledgement of what his absence meant to me or to his father's memory. James nodded slowly and opened the will. What happened next would destroy the life Michael thought he was about to inherit. To understand what Robert Thompson built, you need to know what we sacrificed to build it. In 1977, when Michael was just 2 years old, Robert had nothing but a dream and a $1,000 loan from my mother. I was 25 years old, a high school English teacher making $12,000 a year. Robert was working 3 jobs, loading trucks at dawn, selling insurance during the day, and cleaning offices at night. We lived in a 1-bedroom apartment above a bakery, and the smell of bread was the only luxury we could afford. When Robert told me he wanted to start his own construction company, I knew what that meant. It meant I would work double shifts tutoring students to pay our bills. It meant we would eat rice and beans for dinner every night for 2 years. It meant postponing everything we dreamed of having. But I believed in him. For the first 5 years, I never bought a new dress. I cut my own hair. I made Michael's clothes from fabric scraps. When other women my age were buying houses and taking vacations, I was calculating whether we could afford to fix our broken refrigerator or if we should just buy ice every day. Robert worked 18-hour days, 7 days a week. He came home with hands so torn from construction work that I had to bandage them every night. He missed Michael's first steps because he was bidding on a job 300 miles away. He missed our anniversary because he was working overnight to finish a project that would keep us afloat for another month. But we had a plan. Every penny Robert earned went back into the business. Every sacrifice we made was an investment in our family's future. When Thompson Industries landed its first major contract in 1982, worth $50,000, I cried. Not from joy, but from relief that we might finally eat something other than pasta for dinner. Michael grew up watching this. He saw his father leave before sunrise and return after sunset. He saw me grading papers until midnight to bring in extra money. He saw us celebrate Christmas with gifts from the dollar store and act like they were treasures. But he also saw what dedication could build. By 1990, Thompson Industries was worth $5 million. By 2000, $50 million. By 2010, $200 million. And by the time Robert was diagnosed with cancer, our company was valued at $850 million. Michael's inheritance wasn't just money. It was 30 years of his father's blood, sweat, and sacrificed health. It was my youth, my career ambitions, my own dreams that I set aside so Robert could build something lasting for our family. When Michael graduated from Harvard in 2005, Robert offered him a position as vice president of operations. The salary was $150,000 a year, more than I had made in my entire teaching career. Michael lasted 6 months. "Dad, this is too much pressure," he said. "I need time to find myself." Find himself. With a Harvard MBA and a guaranteed position in a multi-million-dollar company, my son needed to find himself. So he traveled to Europe for 8 months on our money. He lived in Thailand for a year, exploring Eastern philosophy on our credit cards. He came back and started an organic coffee shop that failed within 18 months, losing $60,000 of Robert's investment. Through all of this, Robert never stopped believing in him. "He's young, Maggie," Robert would say. "He needs to make his own mistakes." But when Robert was diagnosed with cancer, something changed. Suddenly, Michael was very interested in the family business again. He started coming to the office regularly. He asked detailed questions about finances. He began talking about, "When I take over." I thought it was maturity. I thought facing his father's mortality had awakened his sense of responsibility. I was wrong. The private investigator's report revealed the truth. Michael wasn't planning to run Thompson Industries. He was planning to sell it. The day after Robert's diagnosis, Michael had contacted 3 different business brokers. He had requested valuations. He had asked about tax implications of large asset sales. While his father was fighting for his life, Michael was calculating how quickly he could convert the family legacy into cash. And Sarah was spending that cash before they even had it. The Beverly Hills mansion wasn't the only thing they had put deposits on. There was a yacht worth $2 million, a vacation home in Aspen, a collection of classic cars. Sarah had even hired an interior designer and paid them $20,000 to start planning the renovation of properties they didn't own yet. They had spent nearly $250,000 of money they assumed would be theirs. But the most heartbreaking discovery was in Michael's phone records. The day Robert entered hospice care, while I was holding my dying husband's hand, Michael was on the phone with a real estate agent, scheduling tours of mansions for the week after the funeral. He had planned the timing of his inheritance celebration before his father was even dead. That night, as I sat in the lawyer's office listening to James Morrison read Robert's will, I thought about every sacrifice we had made. Every missed dinner, every skipped vacation, every penny saved and invested in building something that would last. And I thought about my son, who had valued a birthday party more than his father's final goodbye. James cleared his throat and began reading the new will's critical passage. To my son, Michael Thompson, I leave the sum of $1 and this message. Your absence from my funeral speaks louder than any words I could write. A man who will not honor his father in death cannot be trusted to honor his father's legacy in life. Sarah gasped. Michael's face went white. There must be a mistake, Michael said, his voice barely a whisper. But James Morrison wasn't finished reading. The next part of the will would reveal just how thoroughly Robert had anticipated his son's betrayal. James Morrison continued reading, his voice steady despite the tension that filled the room like smoke. Sarah was gripping Michael's arm so tightly her knuckles had turned white. My son sat frozen, staring at the lawyer as if he could change the words simply by willing them to be different. Furthermore, James read, I direct that all evidence of Michael's financial planning during my illness be presented to him now, so that he may understand that his betrayal was not hidden from me. James opened a second folder and spread documents across the mahogany table. Bank statements showing Michael's consultations with business brokers, credit card receipts for deposits on properties, phone records showing dozens of calls to real estate agents during Robert's final weeks. But the most damning evidence was a recording. 3 days before your father died, James said, placing a small digital recorder on the table. He asked me to record a conversation he was having with someone. He wanted you to hear this, Michael. James pressed play. Robert's voice filled the room, weak but unmistakably clear. Hello, is this Marcus at Beverly Hills Premier Properties? This is Robert Thompson. I understand my son Michael has been looking at houses in your area. Oh yes, Mr. Thompson, came the enthusiastic reply. Michael and Sarah are wonderful clients. They've put deposits on the Hillcrest mansion, $8.5 million. They're very excited about moving in after your estate is settled. I see. And when did they schedule the final walkthrough? March 20th, sir. They said that would give them enough time after the funeral to handle the legal matters. 5 days after the funeral. Michael had planned his celebration mansion tour for 5 days after his father's funeral. In the recording, Robert's voice remained calm. Thank you for your time. The recording ended. The silence in the lawyer's office was deafening. Michael's face had gone from white to gray. Sarah was no longer gripping his arm. She was pushing her chair away from him, as if his failure could somehow contaminate her. Dad knew, Michael whispered. Your father knew everything, James confirmed. He hired the private investigator 6 weeks before he died, not because he suspected your disloyalty, but because he hoped to be proven wrong. James pulled out another document, this one handwritten in Robert's careful script. Your father wrote this letter the day he recorded that phone call. He wanted me to read it to you if the will was ever contested, but given the circumstances, I think you should hear it now. My dear son, if you are hearing this letter, it means my worst fears about your character have been confirmed. It means you valued money more than memory, inheritance more than integrity, wealth more than wisdom. I am not angry with you, Michael. I am heartbroken. When you were 5 years old, you brought me a drawing you made at school. It was our family standing outside a big house with a garden. You told me that someday, when you were grown up, you would buy me and your mother the most beautiful house in the world. That little boy understood something the man you became has forgotten. Houses, cars, money, possessions. None of these things matter unless they are shared with people who truly love you. Your mother and I built Thompson Industries not to make ourselves wealthy, but to ensure that our children and grandchildren would never know the poverty we experienced. We wanted to give you security, opportunity, and the freedom to pursue your dreams. But wealth without character is not a gift. It is a curse. You have shown me that you see our family legacy as nothing more than an ATM. You have demonstrated that you view my death not as a loss to be mourned, but as an opportunity to be celebrated. I hope someday you will understand that the greatest inheritance I could have given you was not money, but the example of what it means to work hard, sacrifice for family, and build something meaningful with your life. You chose to reject that inheritance the day you chose a party over my funeral. I pray that losing everything will teach you what having everything could not. Your father, who loved you more than you will ever know, Robert Thompson. When James finished reading, Sarah stood up abruptly. "This is insane," she said, her voice shrill. "You can't just cut someone out of a will because they missed a funeral. We'll contest this. We'll fight it in court." "You're welcome to try," James said calmly. "But I should inform you that your husband signed a document 5 years ago acknowledging that his father had the absolute right to change his will at any time for any reason. It was part of the agreement when Robert paid for Michael's failed coffee shop. Even Michael's business failures had been used to protect the family fortune from his poor judgment." "How much?" Michael asked suddenly, his voice barely audible. "I'm sorry? How much did he leave me?" "You said $1, but there has to be more. Some kind of trust or property or—" James shook his head. $1, Michael. That's all. And the rest? 50% goes to your mother, as it always would have. The other 50%, approximately $425 million, will be distributed among 15 charities that your father supported anonymously for the past 20 years. Charities. My husband had been donating millions to charities for decades, and I had never known. Even in his generosity, Robert had been humble. "The Children's Hospital will receive $50 million, James continued. "The homeless shelter where your father volunteered every Christmas will receive $30 million. The scholarship fund for underprivileged students will receive $40 million. With every charity James named, Michael seemed to shrink further into his chair. His inheritance, the money he had been spending before he even had it, was going to help thousands of people who truly needed it. "There is one final provision," James said, "and this one concerns you directly, Mrs. Thompson." He handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Robert's handwriting. Inside was a bank account number and a note that made me smile for the first time since the funeral. "My darling Maggie, I know you will want to be generous with Michael, despite his failures. I also know that our son will come to you begging for money within days of this reading. The account number above contains $5 million. It is yours to do with as you wish. You may give it to Michael if you choose, but only if he earns it. The decision is entirely yours. You have always been the wisdom behind my success. Now, be the wisdom that guides our son toward redemption. All my love, Robert." As I read those words, I realized that my husband's final gift to our family wasn't money. It was the opportunity for Michael to finally learn what really mattered. But first, he would have to prove he was capable of learning. The week after the will reading was the longest week of my life. Michael called me every day, sometimes multiple times, but I let every call go to voicemail. I needed time to think, time to process what Robert had revealed, and time to decide what kind of mother I wanted to be in this moment. The voicemails started desperate and became increasingly frantic. Monday. "Mom, please call me back. We need to talk about Dad's will. There has to be something we can do." Tuesday. "Mom, Sarah's family is asking questions. Her cousin called asking when we're going to close on the Beverly Hills house. I don't know what to tell them." Wednesday. "Mom, the bank called about our credit cards. We're approaching our limits. I really need to talk to you." Thursday. "Mom, please. I know you're upset about the funeral, but we're family. Dad wouldn't want you to abandon me." Friday. "Mom, Sarah left. She took her jewelry and moved back to her mother's house. She says she can't be married to someone with no future. Please call me." Sarah had left him. The woman who had convinced him to skip his father's funeral, who had spent $250,000 of money they didn't have, who had planned mansion tours for the week after the funeral, had abandoned him the moment she realized the money wasn't coming. I almost felt sorry for him. On Saturday morning, I finally decided to see him. But I didn't go to comfort him. I went to test him. Michael was living in a tiny apartment downtown, the kind of place Robert and I had lived in 47 years ago when we were starting out. When he opened the door, I barely recognized my son. He had lost at least 15 pounds. His hair was unwashed, his clothes wrinkled. His eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. "Mom," he said, and started crying. For a moment, my maternal instincts kicked in. This was my child, the baby I had nursed and protected and loved unconditionally for 37 years. Every fiber of my being wanted to hold him and tell him everything would be okay. But then I remembered the recording of him planning his mansion purchase while his father lay dying, and I forced myself to be strong. "Michael," I said, sitting down in his tiny living room, "I want to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." He wiped his eyes and nodded eagerly. "Anything, Mom. I'll tell you anything. If your father had lived, if he had recovered from cancer, would you have continued working at Thompson Industries?" Michael hesitated. That hesitation told me everything I needed to know. Yes, of course I would have. That's not what the private investigator found. He discovered that you had been in talks with a startup company in California. You were planning to leave Thompson Industries and move to Los Angeles with Sarah. Michael's face crumpled. "How did you?" "Your father knew everything, Michael. Every plan you made, every conversation you had, every decision you were considering. He spent the last months of his life watching his son prepare to abandon everything he had built. I wasn't abandoning anything. I was going to sell the company and invest the money in new opportunities." Sell the company. The words hit me like a physical blow. Sell Thompson Industries? The company your father spent 30 years building? "Mom, it's just a business. We could have made so much more money in tech investments, in crypto, in real estate." Dad was old-fashioned. He didn't understand modern opportunities. Old-fashioned. My husband, who had turned a $1,000 loan into an $850 million empire, was old-fashioned. And what would have happened to the employees? The people who depended on Thompson Industries for their livelihoods? Michael shrugged. "That's not my responsibility. Business is business." That shrug broke my heart completely. This wasn't grief-talking or stress or temporary poor judgment. This was who my son had become. A man who viewed other people's lives as acceptable losses in his pursuit of easy money. "Michael," I said slowly, "do you have any idea what your father and I sacrificed to build the life you grew up in? You guys did well for yourselves. You had a nice house, nice cars. It's not like you were suffering. We ate rice and beans for dinner every night for 2 years so your father could reinvest every penny into the business. I wore the same 3 dresses for 5 years because we couldn't afford new clothes. Your father worked 18-hour days, 7 days a week, for a decade. But it paid off, right? You ended up rich. Ended up rich. As if wealth was the goal, rather than the byproduct of hard work and sacrifice. Michael, if I gave you money right now, what would you do with it?" His eyes lit up immediately. "Well, first, I'd pay off the credit cards. Then, maybe I could put a deposit on a smaller house. Nothing too fancy. And Sarah said she might come back if I could prove I wasn't a complete failure." Sarah again. Even after she had abandoned him in his darkest hour, he still wanted to win her back with money. "What about getting a job?" "Mom, I have a Harvard MBA. I can't just take any job. It would have to be something appropriate to my education level. Appropriate to his education level." While his father was building an empire, Michael was worried about appearances. "Your father started Thompson Industries by loading trucks at 4 a.m. That was different. Dad didn't have the opportunities I have." "What opportunities, Michael? You just lost an $850 million inheritance because you couldn't be bothered to attend your father's funeral." For the first time since I had arrived, Michael showed a flash of anger. "That's not fair, Mom. One mistake shouldn't cost me everything. Sarah's party was important to her family. I was trying to be a good husband. And what about being a good son? I was a good son. I worked at Dad's company when he asked me to. For 6 months. Then you quit to find yourself in Europe." I needed time to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. On your father's money. That's what family is for. That's what family is for. Michael thought family existed to fund his self-discovery and cushion his failures. I stood up to leave, and Michael panicked. Mom, wait. I know I made mistakes, but I can change. I can be better. Please don't abandon me like Sarah did. Sarah left you because she thought you had no money. I'm leaving because I finally understand what kind of man you've become. As I walked toward the door, Michael called after me desperately. What about the money Dad left you? You could share it with me. I'm your son. I turned back to look at him one last time. Yes, Michael, you are my son. And that's exactly why I'm going to give you the greatest gift your father and I never gave you. What's that? The chance to earn something for yourself. I walked out of that apartment knowing that the real test was just beginning. 3 weeks passed without a word from Michael. I was beginning to think that perhaps losing everything had finally taught him something about self-reliance. Then, on a Tuesday morning that started like any other, I received a call that changed everything. Mrs. Thompson, this is Dr. Elizabeth Martinez at St. Mary's Hospital. Your son Michael was brought in this morning after collapsing at a job interview. My heart stopped. Despite everything, he was still my child. Is he okay? What happened? He's stable now, but he was severely dehydrated and malnourished. Mrs. Thompson, when did you last see your son? I told her about our meeting 3 weeks ago, and she was quiet for a moment. Mrs. Thompson, I think you should come down here. There are some things you need to know. When I arrived at the hospital, I found Michael in a bed that looked too big for his now gaunt frame. He had lost even more weight, and his skin had a grayish pallor that reminded me terrifyingly of Robert during his final weeks. Mom, he whispered when he saw me. I'm sorry. What happened, Michael? Dr. Martinez joined us, her expression serious. Your son hasn't been eating regularly for weeks. He told us he's been living on crackers and water because he couldn't afford food. Couldn't afford food. My son, who had grown up in a mansion, who had attended Harvard, who had never known a day of real hunger in his life, had been starving himself rather than ask for help. But he could have called me, I said. He said you told him he needed to earn everything himself. And you? What would you do in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Share your experience in the comments. Dr. Martinez left us alone, and I sat down beside Michael's bed. For the first time since Robert's funeral, I really looked at my son, not as the spoiled man who had disappointed me, but as the broken human being lying before me. Tell me what's been happening, I said softly. Michael's story came out in pieces, between tears and long silences. After I left his apartment, he had tried to find work, but his Harvard MBA and his expectation of high-level positions had made him unemployable in entry-level jobs. Companies either thought he was overqualified or suspected he would leave the moment something better came along. I applied for management positions, he said, but everyone wanted experience running actual businesses, not just working for my father's company for 6 months. What about other kinds of work? I tried, Mom. I really did. I applied to be a server at restaurants, but they said I had no experience. I tried retail stores, but they looked at my resume and laughed. One manager actually said, "What's a Harvard boy doing applying for a minimum wage job?" For the first time in his life, Michael was experiencing what millions of people face every day, the difficulty of finding work when you're desperate. I've been sleeping in my car for the past week, he continued. I couldn't make rent. The landlord changed the locks, sleeping in his car. The same Mercedes that Robert had bought him for his 30th birthday, now serving as his bedroom. Why didn't you call me? Because you were right, Mom. I needed to learn to do things myself, but I don't know how. I've never had to actually work for anything before. That admission hit me harder than any anger could have. Michael wasn't just broke. He was facing the reality that he had no practical life skills. The job interview this morning, I said. What was it for? Loading trucks at a warehouse, 4 a.m. to noon, $9 an hour. The same kind of work Dad did when he was starting out. My heart broke a little. What happened? I showed up at 4 a.m. like they told me, but I hadn't eaten a real meal in 3 days, and I fainted after an hour of loading boxes. They called an ambulance. Michael had lasted exactly 1 hour doing the kind of physical labor that Robert had done for years to build our future. The supervisor was actually nice about it, Michael continued. He said if I got my health back together, he'd give me another chance. But Mom, I don't know if I can do it. I'm not strong like Dad was. For the first time since the funeral, I heard something in Michael's voice that gave me hope. Humility. Michael, I said carefully, what have you learned from these past few weeks? He was quiet for a long time, staring at the hospital ceiling. I learned that I'm completely useless, he said finally. I have an expensive education, but I can't do anything practical. I can't fix things. I can't build things. I can't even carry boxes without fainting. Sarah was right to leave me. I really am a failure. Is that all you learned? I learned that poor people aren't poor because they're lazy. I always thought if someone was struggling financially, it was because they weren't trying hard enough. But I've been trying as hard as I know how, and I still ended up sleeping in my car. That was progress, but I needed to hear more. What else? I learned that Dad was right about everything. The money, the business, the importance of building something instead of just spending it. I wanted to sell Thompson Industries and buy toys for myself. Dad built it to create jobs, to help families, to make a difference in the world. Michael started crying again, but these tears were different from the self-pity I had seen before. Mom, I understand now why Dad cut me out of the will. I didn't deserve his legacy. I would have destroyed everything he worked for. I reached over and took his hand. It was thin and calloused from his attempts at manual labor. Michael, what would you do if I gave you a second chance? What do you mean? Your father left me $5 million to use as I see fit. I could give it to you. Michael's eyes widened, but then something unexpected happened. He shook his head. No, Mom, not yet. What? I'm not ready for that money. If you gave it to me right now, I'd probably just use it to get Sarah back and buy a house and go right back to being the person Dad was disappointed in. This was not the answer I had expected. I need to earn it, Michael continued. I need to prove to myself and to you and to Dad's memory that I can be worthy of it. How do you plan to do that? Michael looked at me with more determination than I had seen from him in years. I want to go back to that warehouse. I want to do the work Dad did. I want to start at the bottom and work my way up, not because I have to, but because I want to understand what it really means to build something with your own hands. For the first time since Robert's death, I smiled. And what about Sarah? Sarah loved me because she thought I was rich. If she can't love me when I'm poor, then she never really loved me at all. My son was finally growing up, but his real test was still to come. 6 months after Michael's collapse at the warehouse, I received a phone call that surprised me more than anything that had happened since Robert's death. Mrs. Thompson, this is Frank Rodriguez, supervisor at Metro Logistics. I'm calling about your son, Michael. My heart sank. Had Michael failed again? Had he given up on his promise to prove himself? Is everything okay? Ma'am, I'm calling because I wanted you to know that your son is the most dedicated worker I've seen in 23 years of managing this warehouse. I had to ask him to repeat that. Michael started here 6 months ago, right? Well, he's never missed a day, never been late, never complained about overtime. Last month, he worked 67 hours in 1 week because we had a major shipment deadline. This was the same man who used to complain about working 8-hour days at his father's company. But more than that, Frank continued, he's been helping the other guys, teaching them about business stuff, helping them with their resumes, even helping one guy study for his GED. We've never had anyone do that before. Is he there today? Can I speak with him? He's on lunch break. Let me get him for you. When Michael came to the phone, his voice sounded different, stronger, more confident. Hi, Mom. Frank tells me you're doing well. I'm learning a lot. Did you know that Roberto, one of the guys I work with, has 3 kids and he's been trying to get promoted to team leader for 4 years? But he never got the chance because he doesn't have the communication skills for the interview. What did you do? I've been working with him after hours, helping him practice presentations, teaching him basic business principles. He got promoted last week. This was not the Michael I knew. The Michael I knew would never have noticed Roberto's struggles, much less spent his free time helping him. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course. Would you consider visiting me? I want to show you something. The next Saturday, I drove to Michael's new apartment. It wasn't much bigger than the one he'd been evicted from, but it was clean and organized. More importantly, it felt like a home rather than a temporary shelter. I've been saving money, he explained as he made me coffee. Not much, but I'm putting away $50 every week. Frank promoted me to assistant supervisor last month, so I'm making a little more. Assistant supervisor. In 6 months, Michael had gone from fainting while loading boxes to being trusted with supervisory responsibilities. But that's not what I wanted to show you, he said, pulling out a thick folder. I've been researching Thompson Industries. Inside the folder were financial reports, employee satisfaction surveys, industry analyses, and a detailed study of the company's impact on the local economy. Mom, did you know that Thompson Industries directly employs 843 people? I shook my head. I had never thought to count. And those jobs support approximately 2,000 family members. Plus, the company uses 76 local suppliers, which creates hundreds more indirect jobs. Michael had spent his evenings analyzing the empire his father built, not from the perspective of someone who wanted to sell it, but from someone who wanted to understand its true value. I calculated that if I had sold Thompson Industries like I planned, at least 300 people would have lost their jobs during the transition. The new owners would have moved operations to cheaper locations. Why are you researching this now? Michael looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. It was a mixture of shame and determination. Because I want to understand what Dad really built, and I want to see if there's any way I could ever be worthy of helping to run it. Michael, you gave up your inheritance. I know, and I'm not asking for it back. But Mom, what if I could prove that I understand what Thompson Industries really means? Not as a source of money, but as a responsibility to all those families who depend on it. This was a side of Michael I had never imagined could exist. What are you proposing? I want to earn my way back, not to the inheritance, but to the right to work there. I want to start at the bottom, learn every department, understand how the business really works. The company already has a full staff. I know. But I've been thinking about expansion opportunities. Based on my research, there are markets Thompson Industries could enter that would create even more jobs. Michael opened another folder, this one filled with business plans and market analyses. Remember the warehouse work I've been doing? I've learned about logistics from the ground up. I see inefficiencies in how construction materials move from suppliers to job sites. Thompson Industries could create a dedicated logistics division that would save money for clients and create 50 new jobs. I stared at the detailed business plan in front of me. This wasn't the work of someone trying to get rich quick. This was the work of someone who genuinely cared about building something meaningful. How long have you been working on this? Every night for 3 months. After my shifts at the warehouse, I come home and research. Weekends too. Why, Michael? Why does this matter to you now? He was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. Because I finally understand what Dad was trying to teach me. It's not about the money, Mom. It's about the responsibility. Every decision Thompson Industries makes affects hundreds of families. Dad carried that weight for 30 years, and I wanted to cash it in for mansions and yachts. Michael showed me photographs he had taken at the warehouse, pictures of his co-workers and their families. This is Roberto's daughter. She's starting college next year because he got that promotion. This is Maria, whose husband was injured in an accident. She's been able to take care of him because our health insurance covers physical therapy. He had dozens of photographs, each with a story about how steady employment had changed someone's life. I used to think business was about making money. Now I understand that business is about making a difference. What do you want from me, Michael? I want you to give me the chance to prove myself. Not with Dad's money, not with any special treatment. I want to apply for a job at Thompson Industries like any other candidate. And if you don't get hired, then I'll keep working at the warehouse and keep learning until I am qualified. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw something I hadn't seen since he was a child, genuine humility and purpose. Michael, there's something I need to tell you. What? Thompson Industries has been without a CEO since your father died. I've been filling in temporarily, but the board has been pressuring me to hire someone permanent. Michael's eyes widened. Mom, I'm not asking for... I know you're not. But what if I told you that the board had already identified their preferred candidate? Who? I pulled out a letter from my purse, one that had arrived just 3 days earlier. Someone called Frank Rodriguez wrote to recommend one of his workers for a management position. He said this person had exceptional leadership skills, a strong work ethic, and a natural ability to help others succeed. Michael read the letter, his face growing pale as he realized what Frank had done. He recommended me for a job at Thompson Industries. He doesn't know you're Robert Thompson's son. He just knows you're the best worker he's ever supervised. My son had earned a recommendation based purely on his own merit. What happens now? He asked. Now, I said, you get the chance to prove whether you really have learned what your father tried to teach you. But first, there was one more test that would determine whether Michael's transformation was genuine or just another performance. The test came 3 days later in the form of a phone call that would reveal the true depth of Michael's character change. Mrs. Thompson, came the familiar syrupy voice through my phone. This is Sarah. I hope you remember me. Sarah, the woman who had abandoned my son the moment she learned he wouldn't inherit millions, who had convinced him to skip his father's funeral, who had spent money they didn't have on dreams of luxury. What do you want, Sarah? I want to apologize. I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened, and I realize I made some terrible mistakes. I doubted that, but I listened. I heard that Michael is working now, that he's doing well. I also heard some rumors that he might be getting a position at Thompson Industries. There it was. Sarah hadn't called to apologize. She had called because she smelled opportunity. What does that have to do with you? Well, Michael and I were married for 3 years. We built a life together. I think we owe it to ourselves to try again, especially now that he's getting his life back on track. Sarah, you left him when he had nothing. I was scared and confused. The whole situation with the will was so shocking. But I've had time to think, and I realized that money isn't everything. Michael is a good man, and I was wrong to leave him. This was a performance, and not a very convincing one. Have you spoken to Michael about this? Not yet? I was hoping you might help me contact him. I know he's been staying away from his old friends, probably embarrassed about everything that happened. Why are you calling me instead of him directly? There was a pause, and when Sarah spoke again, her voice had lost some of its artificial sweetness. Because I know you have influence over him, and I know that deep down you want your son to be happy. What exactly are you asking me to do? Just give me his phone number, let me talk to him, and maybe put in a good word for me? This was exactly the kind of test Robert would have designed. Sarah was offering me the chance to see whether Michael had truly changed or whether he would fall back into old patterns the moment his ex-wife showed interest again. I'll think about it, I said, and hung up. That evening, I called Michael and told him about Sarah's call. She wants to see you, I said simply. The silence on the other end of the phone stretched so long, I thought we might have been disconnected. Mom, he said finally, what did you tell her? I told her I would think about it. What do you want me to tell her? Another long pause. Can I ask you something first? How did she find out about the possible job at Thompson Industries? I don't know. Word gets around. Mom, I haven't told anyone about that possibility except you. If Sarah knows about it, it means she's been keeping track of my life, waiting to see if I became worth her attention again. I was surprised by the clarity of his analysis. What does that tell you about her motives? It tells me that she's exactly the same person she was when she left me sleeping in my car. And what does that mean for you? It means that if I take her back now, I'll be proving that I haven't really changed either. This was not the response I had expected from the man who had begged me to help him win Sarah back just months earlier. Michael, do you still love her? I thought I did. But I think what I loved was the idea of her. Sarah represented everything I thought I wanted. Luxury, status, the appearance of success. And now? Now I realized that the person I was when I was with Sarah was someone I don't want to be again. I felt a surge of pride in my son that I hadn't experienced since he was a child. So what do you want me to tell her? Tell her that I'm grateful for the lesson she taught me. What lesson? That the right person will love you when you have nothing, not just when you have everything. The next morning, I called Sarah back. I spoke with Michael, I told her. Wonderful. What did he say? When can we meet? He said to tell you that he hopes you find what you're looking for. What does that mean? It means he's not interested, Sarah. But he doesn't understand. I really have changed. I'm not the same person I was before. Neither is he. Mrs. Thompson, please. I know I made mistakes, but everyone deserves a second chance. You're right. Everyone does deserve a second chance. Michael is using his to become a better man. You should use yours to find someone who actually wants to be with you." I hung up before she could respond. That afternoon, I received another call, this one from Michael. "Mom, I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For giving me the chance to prove that I really have changed. 6 months ago, if Sarah had called wanting me back, I would have done anything to make that happen. What's different now?" "Everything. I've learned what it feels like to earn something through hard work. I've seen what real friendship looks like with the guys at the warehouse. I understand what Dad meant about building something meaningful instead of just accumulating things. And I realize that I don't want to go back to being the person I was, even if it means being alone." "You're not alone, Michael." "I know, Mom. I have you, and I have friends who respect me for who I am now, not for what I might inherit someday." "Are you ready for your interview at Thompson Industries?" "I think so. But Mom, I need you to promise me something." "What?" "Promise me that if I get this job, it will be because I earned it, not because I'm your son." "Michael, you already have earned it. Frank Rodriguez's recommendation, your business plan, your work ethic, all of that speaks for itself. But promise me anyway. I need to know that whatever happens, I did it myself." "I promise." 3 days later, Michael interviewed for a junior management position at Thompson Industries. The interview panel consisted of 5 senior employees, none of whom knew his identity. They interviewed 6 candidates for the position. Michael was hired unanimously. But the real test of his character was still coming, because there was one more surprise that Robert had left us, one final piece of his plan that would determine whether our family could truly heal. And this surprise would require Michael to make the most difficult choice of his life. Michael had been working at Thompson Industries for 3 months when James Morrison called me with news that would change everything we thought we knew about Robert's final plan. "Mrs. Thompson, I need to see you urgently. There's something about your husband's will that I was instructed not to reveal until certain conditions were met." I met James at his office that same afternoon, my mind racing with possibilities. What else could Robert have planned? "Margaret, your husband was more strategic than even you realized. The will we read 6 months ago was not his final will." I felt the blood drain from my face. "What do you mean?" James opened a safe behind his desk and withdrew another folder, this one sealed with wax and marked with Robert's signature. "Your husband created what's called a conditional bequest. If Michael had remained the same person he was at the time of Robert's death, then the will we read would have stood. But if Michael demonstrated genuine change and personal growth, then this document would take effect." How would Robert know if Michael had changed? He established specific criteria. Michael had to maintain steady employment for at least 6 months. He had to be recommended for advancement based on merit alone. He had to demonstrate concern for others less fortunate than himself. And most importantly, he had to refuse easy money when it was offered to him. My heart began to race. Sarah calling was part of Robert's plan. Not directly. But your husband anticipated that Michael's ex-wife would return if she thought he was regaining financial prospects. Robert instructed me to monitor the situation and observe Michael's response. How could you monitor it? Frank Rodriguez has been reporting to me monthly. I stared at James in shock. Frank works for you? Frank Rodriguez is a retired detective who has done investigative work for this law firm for 15 years. When Robert asked me to find someone who could evaluate Michael's character growth, I asked Frank to create a position at Metro Logistics. My mind was reeling. Michael's job, his supervisor, his entire transformation, it had all been orchestrated by Robert from beyond the grave. So Michael's achievements weren't real? On the contrary, they were completely real. Frank's instructions were simply to observe and report. He was told to treat Michael exactly like any other employee. Michael earned his promotions, his recommendations, and his co-workers' respect entirely through his own efforts. James opened the sealed folder and spread new documents across his desk. According to Frank's reports, Michael has exceeded every benchmark your husband established. He has demonstrated genuine humility, authentic concern for others, and a work ethic that honors his father's legacy. What does the new will say? It restores Michael's inheritance, but with conditions that ensure he can never again take his responsibilities lightly. I read through the documents with growing amazement. Robert had thought of everything. The inheritance is structured as a trust, James explained. Michael can access the funds only for specific purposes, expanding Thompson Industries in ways that create jobs, supporting charitable causes, or investing in his own continued education and personal development. What about personal expenses? He receives a salary commensurate with his position at the company, but the inheritance money can never be used for luxury purchases, real estate speculation, or any of the frivolous spending he had planned originally. And if he violates these conditions, the money immediately transfers to the charities specified in the original will. But there was more. Additionally, James continued, Robert established a performance-based system. As Michael demonstrates continued growth and responsible leadership, more funds become available to him. But if he ever returns to his previous behavior patterns, the trust can be revoked. How will that be determined? By a board of trustees consisting of you, myself, Frank Rodriguez, and 3 long-term Thompson Industries employees who worked closely with your husband. Robert had created a system that would reward Michael's continued growth while protecting both the family legacy and the employees who depended on the company. There's one final element, James said, pulling out a letter addressed to Michael. Your husband wanted his son to read this only if he proved himself worthy of redemption. That evening, I asked Michael to come to dinner at the family home. He arrived carrying flowers and a bottle of wine that I knew represented a significant portion of his weekly salary. Mom, you look serious. Is everything okay? I told him about my meeting with James Morrison, about the conditional will, about Frank Rodriguez's true identity, about the trust that was waiting for him. Michael listened in complete silence, his face cycling through expressions of shock, confusion, and something that might have been grief. When I finished, he sat quietly for several minutes. So, Dad knew, he said finally. He knew I would change. He hoped you would. He created the circumstances that would give you the best chance to discover who you really could be. And Frank? All this time, he was watching me, reporting on me? Yes. Mom, I feel like such an idiot. Here, I thought I was proving myself, but it was all just another test. Michael, think about what you just said. Do you believe Frank's respect for you was fake? Do you think Roberto's gratitude was an act? Do you think your co-worker's friendship was orchestrated? Michael considered this. No, those relationships were real. Then what you accomplished was real too. Your father didn't change you, Michael. He just created the opportunity for you to change yourself. I handed him Robert's final letter. Your father wanted you to read this. With trembling hands, Michael opened the envelope. My son, if you are reading this letter, it means you have become the man I always believed you could be. It means you have learned what I spent 30 years trying to teach you. That true wealth comes not from what you accumulate, but from what you contribute. I know you must feel deceived, learning that your journey was guided by my hand, even after my death. But I want you to understand something important. Every choice you made was yours alone. I could arrange circumstances, but I could not force character. You developed integrity because you chose to develop integrity. The money I am returning to you is not a reward for good behavior. It is a tool for continuing the work we started together. Thompson Industries is not just a business. It is a responsibility to hundreds of families who depend on us for their livelihoods. That responsibility is now yours. But more than that, son, I want you to know that I am proud of the man you have become. The boy who skipped my funeral to attend a party would never have spent his evenings helping a co-worker study for his GED. The young man who wanted to sell our company for personal gain would never have developed a plan to expand it in ways that create more jobs. You have earned not just my inheritance, but my respect. Your father, Robert Thompson? Michael was crying by the time he finished reading, but these were different tears than I had seen from him before. These were tears of gratitude, not self-pity. Mom, he said, I don't want the money. This was not what I had expected him to say. What? I want to earn my way up in the company the same way Dad did. I want to prove that I can build something meaningful before I inherit the tools to build something bigger. Michael, your father wanted you to have this inheritance, and I will accept it. But not yet. Ask James to put the trust on hold for 2 years. Let me prove that I can run Thompson Industries successfully before I gain access to funds that could make me complacent again. I stared at my son in amazement. 6 months ago, he had been planning to sell the company for quick cash. Now he was asking to delay his inheritance to prove his worthiness. Are you sure about this? I'm sure, Mom. I finally understand what Dad was trying to teach me. And I want to honor that by earning his trust completely. But Michael's transformation, remarkable as it was about to face its ultimate test, because there was someone who had been watching our family drama unfold. Someone who had their own plans for the Thompson fortune. Someone who would stop at nothing to destroy everything Michael had worked to build. The attack came from the last person I expected, my own sister, Linda. Linda had always lived in Robert's shadow. While he built an empire, she made a series of poor financial decisions that left her constantly struggling. She had borrowed money from us dozens of times over the years, always promising to pay it back, never actually doing so. What I didn't know was that she had been planning her own claim to the Thompson fortune for months. The first sign of trouble came on a Wednesday morning when James Morrison called me in a panic. "Margaret, we have a serious problem. Someone has filed a lawsuit challenging Robert's will on grounds of mental incompetence." That's ridiculous. Robert was completely lucid until the day he died. The plaintiff claims to have evidence that Robert was suffering from dementia during his final months, and that you manipulated him into changing his will to punish Michael. Who filed this lawsuit? Linda Patterson, your sister. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. Linda, but she was at the funeral. She supported me through everything. Margaret, there's more. She's also filed papers claiming that she deserves a portion of the estate as Robert's closest living relative after you and Michael. She has no legal standing. She's not mentioned in any of Robert's wills. She's arguing that the original will, leaving everything to Michael, should be reinstated, and that as Michael's closest relative after you, she should be appointed as guardian of his inheritance since he's proven himself financially incompetent. This was insane. Linda was trying to get control of Michael's inheritance by arguing that he was incompetent to manage it himself. James, what evidence could she possibly have of Robert's mental incompetence? She's submitted recordings. My blood went cold. What kind of recordings? Phone conversations between her and Robert from his final weeks. In them, Robert sounds confused, forgetful, and easily influenced. That afternoon, James played the recordings for me. In them, Robert did indeed sound disoriented and confused. He forgot Linda's name, he couldn't remember what day it was, and he seemed to agree with whatever she suggested. But something about the recordings felt wrong. James, Robert was never like this when I was with him. Even in his final days, he was lucid. Could the pain medication have caused confusion during certain periods? Not like this. This doesn't sound like Robert at all. I took the recordings to Michael and played them for him that evening. Mom, this is fake. What do you mean? Listen to the background noise. In this recording, Aunt Linda claims Dad called her on March 10th, but you can hear construction equipment in the background. There was no construction happening near our house in March. Michael was right. We had been dealing with road construction on our street, but that didn't start until April. There's something else, Michael said, rewinding the recording. Listen to Dad's voice here. He says Margaret, but it sounds off, like it's been spliced in from somewhere else. Are you saying Linda faked these recordings? I'm saying we need to have them analyzed by an expert. The next day, James hired a forensic audio specialist to examine Linda's evidence. The results were shocking. These recordings have been heavily manipulated, the expert reported. Multiple segments have been cut and pasted together from different conversations. Some of Mr. Thompson's responses have been taken from completely different contexts and inserted into new conversations. Linda had created fake evidence of Robert's mental incompetence by editing together fragments of real phone calls. But when we tried to have the lawsuit dismissed based on the fraudulent evidence, we discovered that Linda had anticipated this problem. She had a second set of recordings that appeared to be unedited, and she had 3 witnesses who claimed to have seen Robert acting confused and disoriented during his final weeks. The witnesses were Sarah, Michael's ex-wife, and 2 of Linda's friends who claimed they had visited Robert at the hospital. This is all lies, I told James. Sarah was never at the hospital during Robert's final weeks, and Linda's friends never visited him. Can you prove that? The hospital keeps visitor logs, but when James requested the visitor logs, we discovered they had been destroyed in a routine records disposal just 1 week after Linda filed her lawsuit. Someone had made sure the evidence that would contradict Linda's witnesses had been eliminated. "Mom," Michael said when I told him about the missing records, "I think I know how to prove Linda is lying." "How?" Dad's phone. His personal cell phone. If Linda really had all these conversations with him, there should be call records. Robert's phone had been in the drawer of his bedside table since the day he died. I had been too heartbroken to deal with his personal belongings, so everything remained exactly as he had left it. When we accessed his call history, we found something that changed everything. During the period when Linda claimed to have had multiple lengthy conversations with Robert about his mental state and his will, his phone showed no incoming or outgoing calls to her number. But it showed something else. Dozens of calls to and from a number registered to a private investigator named Marcus Webb. "Mom, Dad was having someone investigate Linda." James helped us contact Marcus Webb, and what he told us revealed the full scope of Linda's deception. "Mr. Thompson hired me 6 weeks before he died," Webb explained. "He suspected that someone in his family was planning to challenge his will, and he wanted evidence to protect his estate." Webb had been monitoring Linda's activities and had discovered that she had been in contact with several will contest specialists, lawyers who made their living challenging the estates of wealthy families. "She had been planning this lawsuit since the day your husband was diagnosed with cancer," Webb told us. "The fake recordings, the false witnesses, even the destruction of the hospital records. It was all orchestrated months in advance." But Webb had been recording Linda's conversations with her lawyers, and what we heard on those recordings revealed the true depth of her greed and betrayal. "Once I get control of Michael's inheritance," Linda said in one recording, "I'll sell that stupid company and split the money with you guys. The kid's an idiot anyway. He doesn't deserve $800 million just because he won the genetic lottery." In another recording, she discussed bribing hospital staff to destroy the visitor logs and coaching Sarah and her friends on what testimony to give. "The beauty of this plan," Linda said, "is that even if Margaret figures out the recordings are fake, she'll never be able to prove it in time to stop the lawsuit. By the time the truth comes out, I'll have legal guardianship of the estate." But Linda had made one critical mistake. She had underestimated how much Robert trusted his family's integrity and how thoroughly he had prepared for every possible betrayal. Because Webb's investigation had uncovered one final piece of evidence that would destroy Linda's lawsuit completely. And this evidence would reveal that Robert's planning went far deeper than any of us had imagined. The evidence that destroyed Linda's lawsuit came in the form of something she never could have anticipated. Robert had been recording every conversation in our home for the past 2 years. "Your husband was more paranoid than you realized," Marcus Webb explained as he set up the audio equipment in James Morrison's office. "He suspected that someone was gathering information about his health and business plans, so he installed a comprehensive recording system throughout your house. Robert never told me about any recordings. He didn't want to worry you. But every conversation that took place in your home, including phone calls made from your landline, was automatically recorded and stored on a secure server." Webb played a recording from 2 weeks before Robert's death. Linda's voice was crystal clear as she spoke to someone on our kitchen phone while I was at the hospital with Robert. "The old man is definitely dying," Linda said. "Margaret is with him constantly, so this is the perfect time to establish that he's mentally incompetent. When he gets out of the hospital, I need you to visit and document his confused behavior." The person on the other end of the call was Sarah. "Are you sure this will work?" Sarah asked. "What if Margaret contests it?" "Margaret is too grief-stricken to think clearly. By the time she figures out what's happening, we'll have legal control of everything. You just stick to the plan and testify that Robert was confused when you visited." "But I never actually visited him." "That doesn't matter. There will be no way to prove you weren't there once we take care of the hospital records." Webb had dozens of similar recordings, documenting every aspect of Linda's plan to steal the Thompson inheritance. But the most damaging recording was one we never expected to hear. "I've been thinking," Linda said in a call made just 3 days after Robert's funeral, "maybe we should just eliminate the Michael problem altogether." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked. "I mean, what if something happened to Michael before he could claim his inheritance? Then I would be Margaret's closest living relative." There was a long pause on the recording. "Linda, you're not talking about—" "I'm just saying, the kid is depressed, living in his car, probably not thinking clearly." People in his situation sometimes make desperate decisions. You want him to hurt himself? I'm saying that if he did, it would solve all our problems. Sarah had hung up immediately after that comment, but the recording continued with Linda making another call. Marcus, it's Linda. I need you to keep an eye on Michael. Make sure he doesn't do anything stupid that would complicate our legal strategy. Linda had been trying to drive Michael to suicide while simultaneously using his emotional state as evidence of his incompetence. When James played these recordings in court, Linda's lawyer immediately withdrew from the case. Her false witnesses recanted their testimony. The lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice, meaning it could never be filed again. But the court proceedings were just the beginning of Linda's consequences. The district attorney filed criminal charges against her for fraud, perjury, conspiracy, and attempted theft. Sarah was charged as a co-conspirator. The hospital employee who had destroyed the visitor logs was arrested for tampering with evidence. Linda faced up to 20 years in prison. The day Linda was arrested, she called me from jail. Margaret, please, I'm your sister. You have to help me. Help you? Linda, you tried to steal my husband's legacy. You attempted to drive my son to suicide. You forged evidence and bribed witnesses. I was desperate. I've been struggling financially for years while you and Robert lived like royalty. We offered to help you countless times. Robert gave you over $200,000 over the years. Loans. You gave me loans that I was expected to pay back. Yes, because that's how responsible people handle money. Please, Margaret, I'll go to prison. My life will be ruined. For a moment, I felt the familiar tug of family loyalty. Linda was my sister, my only remaining family besides Michael. Every instinct told me to find a way to help her. But then I thought about Michael, sleeping in his car while Linda planned to steal his inheritance. I thought about Robert, working 18-hour days to build something meaningful while Linda made excuses for her failures. I thought about the employees of Thompson Industries, whose jobs Linda would have eliminated without a second thought. Linda, I said, you made your choices. Now you get to live with the consequences. I hung up and never spoke to her again. 3 months later, Linda was sentenced to 12 years in prison. Sarah received 5 years. The hospital employee was sentenced to 2 years and fired from his position. Justice had been served, but the real victory was what happened to Michael during this ordeal. Throughout the months of legal battles, Michael had refused to let the stress affect his work performance. He continued to excel at Thompson Industries, earning the respect of employees who had worked with his father for decades. More importantly, he had stood by me during the lawsuit, never once asking about his inheritance or showing any concern for the money. His only focus had been on protecting his father's legacy and supporting me through the trauma of my sister's betrayal. Mom, he said the day Linda was sentenced, I want to accept Dad's inheritance now. Are you sure you're ready? I'm sure, but not because I want the money, because I finally understand the responsibility that comes with it. That afternoon, James Morrison officially transferred control of the Thompson Trust to Michael. $850 million structured to ensure it would be used wisely and ethically. Michael's first act as trustee was to establish a scholarship fund for children whose parents worked at Thompson Industries. His second was to create a financial literacy program for low-income families. His third act surprised me most of all. I want to donate $1 million to the Legal Aid Society that helps families fight fraudulent will contests, he told James. What Linda did to us, she's probably done to other families who didn't have the resources to fight back. That evening, Michael and I sat in the family home where Robert had planned every detail of our family's redemption. Do you think Dad knew about Linda? Michael asked. I think your father understood that wealth brings out the worst in some people and the best in others. Which category do I fall into? I looked at my son, thinking about the man he had become through loss and hardship and the choice to grow rather than give up. You've proven that you fall into the same category as your father. You see money as a tool for good, not as an end in itself. I have one more thing I want to do with the inheritance, Michael said. What's that? I want to set aside $5 million for you to use however you want. Not as an investment or a trust, but as a gift from a son who finally understands everything his mother sacrificed for his family. As I looked at Michael, I realized that Robert's plan had worked perfectly. Not just to teach our son about money and responsibility, but to heal our family and ensure that the Thompson legacy would continue for generations. But there was one final surprise waiting for us, one last gift from Robert that would complete our family's transformation. 1 year after Linda's sentencing, James Morrison called me with news that would bring our story full circle. "Margaret, I've been instructed to give you something today. It's the final element of Robert's plan." In his office, James handed me a small wooden box that I recognized immediately. It was the first thing Robert had ever built with his own hands, a jewelry box he had made for me during our first year of marriage when we couldn't afford to buy one. Inside the box was a letter and a small key. The letter was in Robert's handwriting. "My dearest Maggie, if you are reading this, it means our son has proven himself worthy of our legacy, and our family has survived the tests I knew would come. The key in this box opens a safety deposit box at First National Bank. Inside that box, you will find the real treasure I wanted to leave our family. It is not money. Money, as we have learned, can corrupt as easily as it can bless. The real treasure is the story of our family's redemption. I have documented every step of Michael's journey, every choice he made, every lesson he learned. This story should be preserved, not just for our family, but for others who might need to learn the same lessons. Our son transformed himself from a selfish, entitled young man into someone worthy of respect and admiration. That transformation is the greatest wealth we could ever leave behind. I love you, Maggie. Thank you for giving me a lifetime of happiness and a son we can both be proud of. Your devoted husband, Robert Thompson." The next day, Michael and I went to the bank together. Inside the safety deposit box, we found hundreds of pages of documentation, photos, recordings, written observations, and a complete chronicle of Michael's journey from disgrace to redemption. But there was something else in the box that took my breath away. It was a business plan, written in Robert's careful handwriting, for something called the Thompson Family Foundation. Dad planned for us to turn his story into a foundation that would help other families, Michael said, reading through the documents. The foundation would provide financial counseling for families dealing with inheritance disputes. It would offer mediation services for families torn apart by money conflicts. Most importantly, it would fund programs that taught young people the value of hard work and personal responsibility. Mom, this is what Dad really wanted his money to accomplish, not just to make us wealthy, but to help other families avoid the mistakes we made. Over the next 6 months, Michael and I established the Thompson Family Foundation. We hired counselors, mediators, and financial experts. We created programs in schools to teach children about money management and ethics. The foundation's first major case was a family in Chicago where 3 siblings were fighting over their mother's estate. Using the mediation techniques Robert had outlined, we helped them resolve their dispute and rebuild their relationships. Our second case was a young man in Detroit whose gambling addiction had led him to steal from his family's business. We funded his rehabilitation and helped him learn the same lessons about responsibility that Michael had learned. Within a year, the Thompson Family Foundation had helped more than 50 families heal from money-related conflicts. But the foundation's greatest success story was Michael himself. 2 years after accepting his inheritance, Michael had transformed Thompson Industries into one of the most respected companies in the country. Employee satisfaction was at an all-time high. The company had expanded into 3 new markets, creating over 200 additional jobs. More importantly, Michael had found personal happiness. He was dating a woman named Rebecca, a teacher who knew him only as a hard-working manager, not as the heir to a fortune. She loved him for his character, not his bank account. Dad would have loved Rebecca, Michael told me one evening as we reviewed foundation reports. She's everything Sarah wasn't. Genuine, caring, more interested in making a difference than in making money. When are you going to propose? I already did. She said yes, but only if I promise that our wedding will be simple and meaningful, not expensive and showy. And what did you tell her? I told her that the best wedding gift I could give her is a lifetime with someone who finally understands what really matters. On the 3rd anniversary of Robert's death, Michael and I stood at his gravestone with Rebecca and her 2 children from her previous marriage. We had come to share some news with Robert. Dad, Michael said, speaking to the headstone as if Robert could hear him, I wanted you to know that Rebecca and I are getting married next month. And we've decided that instead of expensive wedding gifts, we're asking people to donate to the Thompson Family Foundation. Also, I added, Thompson Industries just won the state's award for ethical business practices. The employees voted to dedicate the award to your memory. As we stood there in the quiet cemetery, I thought about the journey our family had taken. 3 years ago, I had been a widow whose son had chosen a party over his father's funeral. Today, I was surrounded by a loving family that understood the difference between wealth and worth. "Mom," Michael said as we walked back to our cars, "I have something to confess." "What's that?" "Sometimes I'm grateful that Dad cut me out of the will." "Why?" "Because if he hadn't, I would never have learned who I really could be. I would have spent my whole life being the person I was at Sarah's party instead of becoming the person I am today." That night, I sat in Robert's study, surrounded by the photos and memories of our 47 years together. I thought about the letter he had left me, about the foundation we had built, about the son we had raised and lost and found again. Robert had been right about everything. The greatest inheritance he could have left us wasn't money. It was the knowledge that people can change, that families can heal, and that the true measure of wealth is not what you accumulate, but what you contribute to the world. Michael had learned to earn respect instead of expecting it. He had learned to build something meaningful instead of just consuming what others had built. Most importantly, he had learned that the best way to honor his father's memory was to become a man his father would be proud to call his son. And me? I had learned that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone you love is the chance to prove they are worthy of that love. Robert's plan had worked perfectly, not just to teach us about money, but to teach us about what truly matters in life: family, integrity, hard work, and the courage to grow from our mistakes. As I prepared for bed that night, I whispered a prayer of gratitude for my husband's wisdom, for my son's transformation, and for the reminder that justice, though sometimes delayed, always finds a way to prevail. And you? Do you believe that justice always comes? Tell me what you thought of this story. If you want to hear more stories of women who overcame betrayal and found their strength, subscribe to our channel. Every story we share is a reminder that no matter how dark things seem, there is always hope for redemption and renewal.